Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. We're going to wait maybe just 1 minute for folks to join, and then we'll begin today's discussion. Okay, we're ready to begin. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the latest installment of our homeroom webinar series in partnership with Lake Research Partners, Emerging Priorities, What Parents and Voters Want in Education. My name is Jessica Au. I'm a senior policy analyst at the Hunt Institute. For those who are unfamiliar with the Hunt Institute, we were founded by four-term North Carolina Governor Jim Hunt, and we serve as a resource for policymakers on education issues across the education continuum through in-person and virtual convenings, research, and other forms of technical assistance. Before we get the conversation started, I did want to provide a brief logistical overview. We're going to start the discussion with about a 15-minute presentation from Celinda Lake, president of Lake Research Partners. And this presentation will highlight some of the key findings that we found from our 2022 nationwide parent and voter survey. Then following Celinda's presentation, we're going to begin a moderated conversation with our panelists and then pivot to a Q&A with our audience. And so if you have any questions throughout the presentation or discussion, please feel free to submit them using the Q&A feature on the bottom of your screen, and we'll do our best to address them during the Q&A. We're also going to record this conversation. The recording is going now, and in the next couple of days, we're going to post it on our YouTube channel. So please be on the lookout for that if you're interested in rewatching. And we also encourage you to join us on Twitter, where you can participate in the conversation using the hashtag #EdHomeroom. And we're also going to be live tweeting from our Twitter account at HuntK12Ed. So great. We have a great conversation ahead of us with a lot of information and insights. So happy to get started. Last fall, as part of the Hunt Institute's initiative to elevate public voices in education and policymaking in partnership with Governor Bob Wise, we began working with Lake Research Partners to conduct a nationwide survey of voters and parents on the challenges that they faced participating in our education systems and their priorities for state and local leaders moving forward in our new normal. And so from those initial conversations, we really learned that topics like learning loss, the digital divide, whole child education, and workforce training were all top of mind for voters across the country. And so this year, as states continue to grapple with new issues and existing issues like learning loss, acts of school-based violence, and student mental health concerns, among others, we really wanted to learn about how public priorities might have strengthened or shifted over the past year. And especially as we're nearing the midterms. And so we want to make sure that current and newly elected officials are really listening to public voices and really engaging them in decision making. And so we're working alongside Lake Research Partners again, and can now point to and share what's top of mind for voters and parents again this year. And so before we move on to Celinda's presentation, I would like to introduce our panelists. Celinda Lake is the president of Lake Research Partners, a national public opinion and political strategy research firm. Celinda is one of the country's leading political strategists. She was one of the 2 lead pollsters for the Biden campaign in 2020 and continues to stay on top of all major issues in our country through her work leading Lake Research Partners. Her interviews and statistics have been quoted in numerous media outlets, and she's appeared on many news programs to provide expert commentary. So welcome, Celinda.
Thank you.
Next, we have former Governor and Member of Congress, Bob Wise. Governor Wise has spent his career advancing education opportunities for our nation's students. In 2019, he completed 14 years as president of the nonprofit Alliance for Excellent Education, a national leader in advocating for the policies and practices necessary for secondary school students to be ready for post-secondary education and careers. Governor Wise served 24 years as governor, member of the U.S. House of Representatives, and a state legislator, and has become a prominent speaker and advisor on education issues and trends. Governor Wise is also a dear friend and partner of the Hunt Institute.
It's a privilege to be here with. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Governor Wise. Lastly, Commissioner Charlene Russell Tucker is the Commissioner of Education for the Connecticut State Department of Education. Prior to her appointment, she served as Chief Operating Officer and Division Chief for the department's Office of Student Supports and Organizational Effectiveness. She also served as Associate Commissioner of Education and Bureau Chief within the department, overseeing a portfolio of programs and services that included student health, nutrition and safety, family engagement, special education, and more. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us today, Commissioner.
Thank you so much.
And thanks to all of our panelists for being here. I know you're all very busy. I'm very looking forward to our conversation. And starting with Celinda, who will be providing a short presentation highlighting some of those key findings from this year's survey. Celinda, please take it away.
Thank you so much. And I want to acknowledge Jesse Klein and Alicia Snell, who are the two people in our firm who have taken the point on this survey and the ongoing research here. And I want to acknowledge the Hunt Institute. This is a very rich data set and very expansive polling, 800 likely 2022 voters. And then we call it in our business oversampling, but we think of it as appropriate sampling so that we can look at all of the voices out there of African-American likely voters, Latinx, AAPI, and Native American, and then also of parents. One of the things that's great about working with the Hunt Institute is that we have such a rich body of data over time, thanks in a lot to the influence of Governor Wise in promoting that we should be looking at this opinion over time, and the thoughtfulness of the Hunt team led by Jessica in particular in formulating the questions. The wonderful thing about this polling is that conventional wisdom is wrong about 95% of the time, plus or minus 5%. And so a lot of the conventional wisdom that you hear about education isn't true. And it's really exciting. It's an exciting time to be engaging the public in a conversation about education because they are very motivated and very supportive. They have a clear vision and a broad agenda for schools and for parental involvement. And there is a lot that is bringing people together to really make a difference. It's also an interesting time to be having this conversation. This is obviously a non-political effort, but you have all of the governor's races up, or most of them right now, and voters are really moving education to their state agendas very, very strongly. So let's go look at this data and see what you think. And I believe all of these slides will be made available to you if you are interested. So what we found is, first of all, we found that people's confidence in the public school system has decreased. They report that it's decreased since the pandemic and over the last year. Parents, however, have remained about the same since the start of the pandemic. And the conventional wisdom is that parents are highly critical of education. Actually, parents are more supportive of education. Just to put it in perspective, though, only about 28% of the electorate in 2022 will be the parents of children under 18. Half of voters say their state spends too little money on public school funding, 52%, and another 26% say they are about right. There is a very, there's also at the local level a sense that people are spending too little in their own communities. Very often people think, yeah, it's a problem over there, but not over here. And people do like their local schools, but in general, people are very supportive of additional funding for public education. That's interesting because people are very tax sensitive right now. And it's interesting because people are short of money. Their inflation and rising cost of living are dominant concerns. People don't think that wages have kept up. So to see this level of support for public funding when they're tax sensitive, most voters don't have kids in public schools right now is really, really telling. Everybody believes that parents should be included in their children's education, what they are taught. It's a core value across partisan lines. Some campaigns may try to say that one party is for this and one party is against it. Parents in all parties and voters in all parties are wildly in favor of parental involvement. People also very concerned about safety in schools, and they have a broad definition. They want their schools free of guns. They're also concerned about physical violence or bullying. They want to hire quality teachers. They want to teach real world skills. They want to ensure that students are reading at grade level. And they strongly support children with disabilities. And in fact, adding that and explicitly recognizing children with disabilities actually increases people's attention. So you can see here that people have a very, very broad agenda. They want everything. The only thing they're not asking schools to do is cure cancer. But other than that, they want schools to do everything, and they have big appetites for education right now. Asked another way, in terms of policies that they support teaching critical skills, increasing job skills and workforce, training educators and other personnel to identify warning signs and intervention techniques related to mental health. And these two agendas, job skills and workforce training and mental health, really have soared onto the scene in the post-COVID environment. People also want individualized learning plans. It may be politically controversial in some school circles, but it is definitely not controversial to the public. They want counseling, social, emotional, and mental health support. They do not reject those words. They want after school and summer learning opportunities as well. So they want to broaden the outreach to students from education. So conventional wisdom would tell you that people want to cut back on funding for schools. That's wrong, even if it increases their taxes. Conventional wisdom would tell you that people are very dissatisfied with public schools and don't want them to do a lot. No, they're actually quite expansive in terms of their agenda. Conventional wisdom would tell you that people have disengaged from schools post-COVID. No, actually, they've engaged even more. And conventional wisdom would tell you that mental health and emotional and social learning is very controversial. People don't know they're not supposed to like it. They're wildly in favor of it. So again, it's nice to have this kind of in-depth, thoughtful data to bring thoughtful voices to the conversation. So let's go look at the data and see if you draw the same conclusions we do. So here on the left, we're asking, has your confidence in the public school system increased, decreased, or stayed about the same? The red is decreased since the pandemic and over the last year. And you can see that people are divided between stayed the same and decreased, but people are nervous about that. They think that there are a lot of people, the people that are most decreased confidence are people that think that the school districts haven't and the actors haven't handled COVID very well. Gen Zers, Indigenous voters, and self-employed voters. So it's an interesting potpourri, but if you're dissatisfied with COVID handling, then you tend to be more likely to think that the school, your confidence is down around education. Even if your confidence is down, however, many, many people want to spend more money, and many, many people have an aggressive agenda for schools. This question asks, do you think your state is spending too much, too little, or about the right amount? 52% say too little. That is up. Conventional wisdom would say that is down. No, it's actually up from 45% overall. Independent voters, Indigenous voters, voters in the West, and voters of parents of very young children are the ones who have most increase in thinking, no, I don't know how I'm going to afford it, and I'm worried about taxes, but I think we ought to increase the funding that we're spending. People are very locally focused on their schools, but they think there needs to be increased funding there, even though they're more positive about their local schools. And just in general, people are supportive of increased funding. Now, it is important to tell people what we're buying with this funding. They want to know where this money is heading. It is also the constituency of people that are particularly for spending more in their local communities, younger voters, Democrats, and African-American voters, who tend to be the ones most likely to say that schools are spending too little money in their communities as well as statewide. If we look at the next slide, a strong majority of voters say parents should be included in their child's education, what they are taught, and parents agree at even higher numbers. So 89% of parents agree with that, 74% strongly, but 77% of Democrats, 75% of independents, and 93% of Republicans agree parents should be included. It's a core value. And of course, most teachers agree with that as well, trying to encourage parental involvement. So what is the appetite? What's the orientation that people have? They want to spend more money. They want to improve their schools. What would they do with that money? And it turns out a little bit of everything. So what we have here is a very interesting slide that may seem a little overwhelming at first, which is on the vertical scale. We see how people rate this list of things as a problem. And then on the horizontal scale, how important do you think it is to address? The blue circle is the things that people think are most important and biggest problems. And that includes freeing schools of bullying, freeing schools of gun violence, reading at grade level, real world skills, quality teachers, supporting children with disabilities, and training for educators. So a very, very expansive agenda. People are also very supportive of a number of things that they may not think of as that big a problem. So they think that it is very important to have learning loss, mental health, improved facilities, improved SEL, personalized learning, excessive testing, and unequal funding. They all think those things are very important. They're not quite as clear how much of a problem that stuff is. If we look at parents, we see a similar agenda, although the whole agenda is moved much, much higher on the scale. But you see in the most important, biggest problems, freeing gun violence, freeing bullying, support for children with disabilities, reading at grade level, training educators, and real world skills, a tremendous amount of overlap. And then again, we see as very important mental health, excessive testing, funding inequality, personalized learning, improving SEL, learning loss, improving facilities. The biggest difference between parents and non-parents is actually access to digital learning. Nobody thinks that's a huge problem. They think there have been some improvements there, but parents rate it as even more important than non-parents. If we look at the next slide, we can look here at reactions to a number of specific proposals. People have a big appetite for fixing a lot of different problems, and they back that up with actually support and intense support for a number of different kinds of programs. So teaching critical skills, increasing job skills. These are things that are very, very salient to the public. Training educators to identify warning signs, increasing literacy to improve student reading, strengthening emergency response plans, including technology and building infrastructure, increasing salaries of teachers. People still continue to think that teachers are underpaid, and increasing school funding transparency. This is one actually that has risen in the last few years. Before, when we did some work for the Hunt Institute, it wasn't as salient to people, but now people would like to know, not from an adversarial perspective, but because they want to make sure that funding is getting to a lot of the things here that they support. If we looked at some wording experiments and we had heard that there was all this controversy about social and emotional learning, and conservatives and Republicans don't like social and emotional learning, and et cetera, et cetera. And we found out that no, it's quite popular. In fact, adding social and emotional learning increases the support for personalized learning in every partisan and demographic group. And it increases it very significantly for parents, and also very significantly for Latinx people. Republicans, Democrats, and independents all increasing. A little bit of fall off with African Americans, but mainly it's because it's already so high. And they also think there needs to be some more personalized learning on basic skills. They don't want that to get in the way. But social and emotional learning is supposed to be so controversial. People don't know that they're not supposed to support it, and they like it a lot. In terms of other policies that they support, individualized learning plans, people are really in love with individualized learning plans. I think it would be very helpful for children. Additional counseling and social and emotional and mental health support, very, very strong support. And young people are really bringing this to the table. Gen Xers, younger parents really bringing this issue to the table. After school and summer learning opportunities, very popular with people. The only thing that's not popular with people is making the school day longer. People are less sure about that, but after school, they think it's the perfect combination. Longer school years, people are split on. Additional days, people are split on, slightly against. Longer school days, people are against. 52 to 40, not wildly against it. But negative, don't think it would be that helpful. And in fact, think there could be a lot of negative consequences for kids. Very interesting to see the differential that people make between after school programs and longer school days. But very broad agenda and very strong agenda. Okay, well, people say they like everything. Are they actually going to do anything about it? And we tested, would you vote for an elected official who wanted to increase funding for public schools? Would that make you more or less likely, or wouldn't it make any difference? Remember, 3/4 of these voters do not have a child in public school right now, mostly because they're too old. 67% say this would make me more likely, 31% much more likely, only 10% less likely, and 18% say it wouldn't make any difference to me. Very similar numbers to what we had in the past, although in the past, so very similar numbers, period. We also asked increase your taxes, and there is tax sensitivity. There was tax sensitivity a year ago, and there remains tax sensitivity today. So people are still by 2 to 1 more likely to vote for the candidate, but it's 19 points less than, and 10 points less than intensity. People are nervous about increased taxes, including some of our base, like Latinx voters. And frankly, they're nervous about increased taxes because they're short of money. Notice that Democrats, independents, and Republicans all for increased funding, and Democrats, independents, even if it raises your taxes. Republicans shift against it if it raises your taxes, but Democrats and independents remaining solidly in favor of the candidate who votes, even if it raises your taxes. I think one of the reasons the Republicans are shifting against it is because they think, well, that can't be a Republican candidate who's supporting that. So there may be a little confounding effect there. If we look at the last chart, a plurality of voters want state and school districts to use their one-time COVID relief funds to address both immediate challenges and long-term challenges. Immediate challenges, 27%, long-term investments, 19%, a whopping 42% say, I want it to go to both. Republicans and older voters are most interested in the immediate challenges. Younger voters, parents of children under 12, which is interesting, and the Northeast and West, most in terms of longer term investments. But what everybody would do is, as President Obama said, we have to learn how to walk and chew gum at the same time. Voters in every demographic group have a plurality who say, I would like to do both of these things with that funding. So the public, very engaged, very supportive, contrary to conventional wisdom, and really eager to unite around an aggressive agenda. And I know I've gone a little over, so let me turn it quickly back to Jennifer for the rest of the conversation.
Thank you so much, Celinda, for that detailed deep dive into some of the survey findings. I really appreciate you comparing some of your findings with conventional wisdom. Our goal for this work really is to cut through the headlines. So it's really interesting to hear about that comparison. So now that we have some level setting on public perceptions in education, I really do want to jump right into our questions for our panelists. And again, to our audience, if you have any questions about the presentation or the discussion shortly, please submit them using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to them later on in the conversation. And so starting with Governor Wise, Celinda provided a lot of information about what's currently top of mind for voters and parents. I'd like to hear from you about what are some of the key takeaways that stood out to you, and how should our state and local policymakers really be grappling with some of this information and responding to public priorities?
The key takeaway, a lot of key takeaways. One, though, it's all in the context that a 2-year countdown clock is ticking now. Actually, less than 2 years, as Commissioner Russell Tucker knows very well, less than 2 years for states to obligate their ESSER funds, their COVID relief dollars. So, and the key takeaway was right at the end for me, which was people understand that there are federal dollars there, or they're coming to, and they want to do both. They want to return to a new normal. They want COVID relief dollars to get their children back in school in a safe place. At the same time, they also want that and understand that this may be the only major source of dollars we have for a long time. So they wanted to do both, do the short term, but also make investments in the long term. I came away with some other specific takeaways. One is, and the important thing about what the Hunt Institute has done and Lake Research Partners is this is a poll or survey that is taken this year, but was also taken the previous year. So there's a way to compare how public attitudes are changing or staying the same. First is there's still a shortage of public confidence, almost 50% in the education system. I think it's very important to note what Celinda was reporting on tax sensitivity. So yes, the people understand this and are willing to support more dollars going to education, but there's also a tax sensitivity, more so this year than last year. And what that means to me, yes, I'm going to give you a conclusion, even if it wasn't asked for. What that means to me is that, once again, the importance of using these federal COVID relief dollars, because people understand investments need to be made, but they're also sensitive to immediate tax increases. Third, they understand learning loss. And I think this is also going to be accentuated and emphasized even more next week when the state NAEP, National Assessment for Educational Progress, literacy and math scores are released, and predictably will show, as the long-term NAEP trend showed just a few weeks ago, that there has been a slowing of progress, and in some cases a decline. Also, the ACT scores that just came out were the lowest in 30 years. Also, what's very significant to me is that what the public said was important to them a year ago, as we were just coming out of COVID, some states and districts still in a COVID situation, is still important. That's emphasizing real world skills, school safety, addressing learning loss and literacy issues. Literacy was high on the agenda this time. Individualized learning plans. That is so significant. If you watched your child for a year and a half, and you know your child has unique needs now that perhaps didn't exist before, you want an individualized learning plan, and mental health, which is incredibly important. So all of these are to reinforce to policymakers that what was important a year ago in the midst of COVID is even as important now, and also folks want you to do something about it.
Thank you so much, Governor Wise, and appreciate you stressing that 2-year countdown and the imperative. I recall when ESSER 1 funding was announced nearly 2 years ago now, and the deadline for that just passed. And so time will certainly fly by over the next 2 years, making these issues all the more important. So moving to a question for you, Commissioner Russell Tucker. We know that states and districts have to incorporate stakeholder engagement as part of their plans to use ARP ESSER funds. And as a result, we've been seeing more states begin to provide some of these opportunities to elevate parent voices. And Connecticut in particular has provided a platform far before the pandemic started for family involvement, called the Commissioners Roundtable for Family and Community Engagement in Education. And so how have you been able to leverage parent and community voices to help drive change through your roundtable? And how has the group informed policies coming out of your department?
So thank you, Jessica. It's so important to be here, and I want to certainly thank the Hunt Institute for facilitating this really, really important education discussion. As an education leader, it's great to be here to hear what we're hearing from families in the community. And so I certainly appreciate the opportunity to be here with Governor Wise and Ms. Lake to engage in this conversation. So you're correct. And this started back in 2016 in my role as then Chief Operating Officer with the department. We developed and implemented this Commissioners Roundtable for Family and Community Engagement in Education. It's a diverse constituent group of about 30 education stakeholders representing parents, guardians, families, community members, school district staff, advocacy organization, yes, and students to advise the Commissioner of Education regarding policies and programmatic priorities. And now in my role as Commissioner, I joke that this is now my roundtable. The roundtable members are valued advisors. And what you may ask was the genesis for the roundtable. Historically, the Commissioner of Education has had easy access to constituencies through various organizing structures and groups, the Superintendent Association, the local boards, business, industry. But prior to our creation of this roundtable, there was not a structural way to have regular access to hear the voices from families and community members. Further, our roundtable was a deliberate mechanism to really bring to life our State Board of Education's value that education is a shared responsibility throughout a student's life from birth to adulthood, and family, school staff, and community members make important contributions to student success, and the best results come when all three work together as equal partners. So a roundtable meets quarterly to bring an authentic voice, a parent voice and community voice to all our products and initiatives, to advise the Commission, as I said before, on policy issues related to family and community engagement in education, to recommend effective practices, to increase successful school and district engagement with families, and to provide strategies to empower families in supporting their students' education. And the roundtable, we look to the roundtable to communicate state-level initiatives as well with families and communities. And the last part of your question is, and so how has this worked for us? Prior to the pandemic, maybe one of the biggest takeaways and outcomes, the roundtable partnered again with our agency, the Connecticut Office of Early Childhood, some funders and families and communities to co-create a definition and a framework for family engagement in Connecticut for advancing family engagement efforts across the state. This framework and definition provide an excellent foundation even when we got to the pandemic and our relief efforts, because we believe authentic partnerships between schools and families have been especially critical during the pandemic, and which is why that family and community connection is one of our investment priorities. And just a book that was just published, Everyone Wins, The Evidence for Family School Partnerships and Implications for Practice, used this definition we created and talked about the work that we've done. So, we've also recently completed our second formal round of our ESSER stakeholder forums. And you better believe it, our stakeholders, including our roundtable members, participated, provided feedback for our planned investments, and that really is important to us. Since inception, the roundtable has provided feedback on our special education state performance plan, our plans about diversifying the educator workforce, our ESSA plan, as I said before, even our Every Student Succeeds Act plan creation. Roundtable was involved in that, on our state plan for Perkins. So as you can hear, when we are doing anything here, I want the voice of families and communities, and the roundtable gives us a great space to go in, get feedback. It is a two-way conversation that we're having. We're learning from them as we're sharing information as well.
Great, thank you so much, Commissioner, and appreciate you emphasizing that need to institutionalize a platform for stakeholder engagement, and not just to provide feedback, but really move that feedback forward to policy change. And so I'm personally hopeful that as we come out of this challenging period, that hopefully better than ever, these platforms coming out of the pandemic in other states will continue on. So thank you for that. Would love to move to a question for you, Celinda. As a leading national pollster and political strategy research firm, you and Lake Research Partners have really had your ear to the ground in terms of how constituents feel about our current education systems and other issues. And so today we're weeks away from elections. How do you see some of the key issues coming out of the survey or other surveys that you've seen really impact the upcoming elections? And I also, of course, welcome your thoughts, Commissioner and Governor Wise, on this question as well. I'm sure you have lots of insight.
Well, I think that education is going to play a major issue, and it's already playing a major role in a lot of the gubernatorial races. That gets less attention in Washington, but gets a lot of attention in the states. And I think so that's point number one. Point number two, I think you'll see a lot of debating over things that are conventional wisdom but are false debates, and it's kind of disappointing. And I worry that those debates will go into the state legislatures. You'll see debates around parental involvement. There is no debate about parental involvement. Everybody's for it. You'll see debates about social and emotional learning. There is no debate about social and emotional learning. People are for it. People want to you'll see debates about funding. People want to prioritize funding, even if they don't have children in schools, under 18. So I think that one of the things that Hunt can try to do, and that all of the voices on this call can do, is it is a time to have a very aggressive narrative around education that unites people and that is expansive. Americans are really committed to schools in their state and in their locales. Their agenda is quite broad. They're nervous about spending in taxes, but they're also realize that some of this takes more money. They're very responsive to what Governor Wise outlined in his comments. And I think they would be very responsive to the kind of plan that was outlined. I wish we could clone you and have you in every state, because that's the kind of dialogue that people want to have, not these false fights about whether we should include social learning in a program or not. And there is a real opportunity here, and a real opportunity with all the legislate. I think it's late to affect the races, but an opportunity as the legislatures emerge. But I worry that our system is going to fail to rise to the level that the public's actually at.
Thanks so much for your thoughts, Linda. Governor, Commissioner, do you have any additional thoughts?
I'll just jump in and say, and certainly appreciate, frankly, the survey is really reinforcing for some of the things that we've been doing here. And certainly, as Commissioner of Education, and so there's so much conversation and discussions around us, is to really, for me, maintain a laser-like focus on our students and our entire ecosystem. And I'll just, share, for example, we have priorities very similar to those that we've heard in the survey, but I also wanted to share that some of the things that we've done in Connecticut that I feel really privileged that education receives robust bipartisan support. But this past session of Connecticut lawmakers passed the most comprehensive mental health bills in the state's history, including grants for schools to hire staff to support student well-being, bolstering some of our home visiting initiatives that are already on the way, and increasing summer programs capacity to support the mental health of our campers and more. And the work that we're doing here, that we've been able to use our ESSER funding to further support and address the social, emotional, and mental health needs of our students and school staff. So it's very reinforcing to hear that this still is something that is important, and to continue to share why we're doing that and be very transparent is very important to us. And so that this laser-like focus and continue to communicate through all the systems with our partners about the importance of why we do this in education continues to be really important, as there is a lot of conversation that sometimes could be distractions.
So if I could add, as a former candidate, if I were running today, first, I agree totally with Celinda that unfortunately with 2 weeks left in an election, a candidate has a retention span of an eighth of about no more than 1 minute on any subject, and tends to get very emotional. What I think the public, though, wants to hear is not about how you can divide us, but about how we can work together. And the data that Celinda and Lake Research Partners and the Hunt Institute have compiled over the last 2 years clearly shows this together theme is what's important. What I've been struck by is that what tends to be divisive issues, masks, vaccines, CRT, these issues, that's not what the public is really responding to. They're very nuts and bolts and serious about what's happening with their children or with their grandchildren. And yes, Celinda, I'm one of those who's aged out of having a public school child anymore. But I know that but what I always was struck by was how strongly grandparents felt about their grandchildren's outcomes. And so what I would be doing, I hope, in the last 2 weeks is saying, can we reason together and see if a candidate can cut through the noise? And incidentally, if all the other candidates are running in one direction, trying to be divisive, sometimes it's the one that says, no, let's see how we can work together that can come out ahead. And that's what the messages of the survey is, but also practical sense is people want to work together. And really they see education, and I think the data is confirming this, they see it in a nonpartisan light, not as whether Republicans or Democrats or independents win on something. They see it in a nonpartisan light and want us advancing their children's outcome and welfare in that light.
Thank you all for your thoughts, and definitely agree with what's been said. So before we move to our Q&A, I do have one more question for all of you that I think many in this space really have been grappling with. And I feel like we're currently at an inflection point with large amounts of ESSER funding left unspent, attached to a 2-year deadline. We have our elections soon. We're going to have our presidential campaign just around the corner. And so it feels like there's a lot of uncertainty about where we go from here. And so what more can state and local leaders really do at this point to continue moving the needle forward toward evidence-driven education transformation? And happy to start with Celinda, if you have thoughts.
I honestly know less about the policy process than I do about the political process. So I'll enter it through that, but I'm really eager to hear the commissioner and the governor's comments, because I think, frankly, they'll be more valuable. I think there is a real opportunity. There's going to be we're in a race to the bottom right now electorally. We're going to have record amount of negative ads. We're going to have people divided. We're going to have a lot of intense false accusations being made. And I share the governor's concern. I don't think you can influence races. And I think a lot of people just regretting they didn't buy satellite dishes so they could avoid this whole mess before the election started. But I think after the election, there's going to be a lot of conversation about what did people really vote for and what were the opportunities. And one of the missed opportunities is that this education narrative started in Virginia, and it has been wrong about 95% of the time, the whole period, the Virginia gubernatorial race. So I think it would be a record time for a number of op-eds from education leaders, from governors, governor-elects, commissioners, previous commissioners, if it's easier politically to do that, to say, using the Hunt data, and we have this data broken out by region too, they're not big regional differences, honestly. And to say, here's what the public is interested in. Let's unite for a better schools. Or, we didn't have enough of an economic dialogue. What are we going to do about improving our economy? What's really interesting is the degree to which people are connecting education and economics. The surge in support for job skill training, for example, is really, really interesting. Maybe there's a podcast or a social media outlet. The people that are really fueling the mental health agenda are the Gen Xers and younger people. Younger people are just adamant about this. And that means a lot of younger parents are adamant about it. And the stigma around mental health is completely gone for them. And they want to add mental health to everything. If it's a housing, and they're right. If it's a housing problem, they want to talk about mental health, education, mental health, whatever it is, add mental health to the equation. So maybe it's a podcast we have this opportunity to do this. Let's not miss it. Let's understand that we can make an intervention. So I think that we should also, and people are very interested in education and kids in November and December because they're thinking about the holidays and their kids, and their parents are going to see their grandkids. So I think it's a real opportunity to have a communication strategy. And of course, Hunt is an expert in this, of op-eds or speeches or social briefings or roundtables that talk about how we can come together and how the public's ready to join us in moving forward on this agenda.
And Jessica, I'll jump in here on the question of what can states and local leaders do at this point. And I believe evaluating effectiveness of our investments is really one way to do that, to maintain transparency around the investments, and as well as fiscal and implementation accountability. And I'll just quickly share that Connecticut, we use our ESSER 2 funds to establish the first of its kind research collaborative. We call it the COVID-19 Education Research Collaborative, to study the impacts of COVID on students' learning, as well as studying the efficacy of the programs and supports that we put in place as a response. And this research collaborative brings together researchers from public and private universities and institutions across Connecticut to work collaboratively on these evaluations. To date, we've evaluated the investments that we made in 2021 in summer enrichment. We got all those resources out there. We got the results back from that and used it to inform our 21-22 summer enrichment program. And we're getting the results now from this year to inform next year. And so we're using that, we're doing a remote learning audit. We are also moving into evaluating a range of investments at the district level, as well as our state investments. And so instead of, I know we've talked about the cliff, we talked about the funding cliff. So we're concentrating exclusively on the funding cliff, but we're also doing it in a way of taking a look at what works. So instead of just doing that on the funding cliff on that side of it, we're building evidence on the effectiveness of the interventions, because by knowing what works, we will be able to advocate, I believe, for continued or sustainable funding at both the state and the federal levels, frankly, as well as philanthropy. So we believe Connecticut will have the strength of results to say, fund and sustain what works. And I like to think about it as, so this could serve as a parachute as we get to this cliff, so our education community can land safely from that cliff. And so I think it really is important that we're looking at what works. And I said before, we need to maintain that level of transparency that is really important.
So let me just echo so strongly what both have said, and particularly Commissioner Russell Tucker, on using evidence, looking at what is working now with the ESSER dollars you're doing. But I also now want to come back to, and I want to speak really candidly to particularly district leaders and policymakers, come back to the 2-year countdown clock. So I look at this as driving along the interstate, and many of us who drive long distances know that occasionally the best thing you can do is pull over to the rest stop and stop for a moment and just let your mind settle, because if you've been involved in traffic for a long time, or in the case of 13,000 district leaders, 50 state superintendents, and what you've been doing is you've been involved in triage for essentially the last 2 years. And now it's time to come out of triage, and you're going to transition to something. The question is whether you're able to transition to a new normal, what you want, as opposed to simply going back to what you had. So you're in the rest stop, and you've shut down for just a few minutes. So ask yourself, are you really moving towards creating that new normal? Or are you just going to put the money back into HVAC systems, not saying they're not important, but my guess is you've already done that in the first CARES Act money, and now you've got additional dollars. We know from Edunomics, Georgetown think tank, we know from Edunomics that most school districts that have ESSER $3 still have a significant amount that is not obligated yet. Or if it's been obligated, you have the flexibility to review how it's being used and to go back and reallocate them. So let me just give you a couple of quick thoughts as you pulled over in the rest stop. Are you creating a new normal? The public understands that there are problems, and they're greater than they were pre-COVID. Celinda's data shows this. The public wants bold action. Data, once again, shows this. The public supports initiatives that make a difference. Individualized learning plans, mental health, workforce relevance, safe schools. There are ESSER dollars, and I just have to throw this in, there are also even more state and local relief dollars that can be used in conjunction, and there are also transportation and infrastructure dollars that can be used to rebuild that internet system and give everyone broadband flexibility. The United States Department of Education is giving, I think, incredible flexibility to districts to design and redesign if they need to. So pull over, think, then transform, get back into the driving lane.
Triage, transition, and transformation. I think that's a really powerful way of describing what students and schools are going through. So appreciate that. Thank you all so much for your thoughtful responses to my questions. I know we have just a few minutes. I would love to move on to your Q&A. I think we have time for one or two more questions. And we have several that have come in, but we'll start with this one. How can education leaders work to better communicate with parents and voters about their educational priorities? How do we go about repairing a weakened sense of trust and restoring confidence among voters, parents, and other key constituents? I think that latter question in particular is a really great question because, as Linda pointed out from our survey, there's declining trust in our public schools. So how do we really rebuild that trust, and how do we continue to communicate with parents and voters? Would love to start with the commissioner with this one, but of course, opening the floor to everyone.
No, sure, thank you. And that really is a great question. And every time I see information about lack of trust, that's the question I ask, how do we do this? I'll go back to a roundtable, and I call it best-in-class collaboration, being able to sit and have conversations with various groups of stakeholders. That really is important. And I know that there's sometimes, and it's not about lack of dissent. It really is about working very deliberately to find common ground. This data, this survey, I think is one of those things that can help us to do that. But be open, be transparent. We have an EdSite data portal that there's so much information there. You want to know about funding? You want to know how we developed a data dashboard, a recovery dashboard? You want to know how schools were doing and how they're doing now? You want to disaggregate your data by different data student groups? You can do that. It allows us to be at the same place using the same level of information to engage with each other in the discourse. And so that the public doesn't feel as if you're trying to hide anything. Everything is transparent. It's there. And then let's have a conversation about how we move forward. That is really important. That's why the roundtable, as I mentioned, is so important to us, to have this information, to understand, and to be able really just to sit and have this conversation cross-sector and to get varying perspectives, and then to work on this together. And it is about working together that we're going to make a difference, I believe. And that's why we work so hard here in Connecticut to really bring all stakeholders to the table so we can have that conversation. You build trust by making sure that you're transparent and everything is out there for all of us to have a dialogue around.
Thank you so much, Commissioner.
I don't think it can be said better, particularly by someone who's made it happen.
Great. Well, I think we do have time for one more question, so I'll try to throw this one in. Given that public priorities can shift during this more volatile period, how do we maintain momentum in keeping these real educational needs top of mind, especially as the country continues to face other pressing issues, things like inflation or economic challenges? I feel like those can often, while big issues can, get in the way of making educational change.
Well, I would question the premise of the question a little bit, but I certainly understand why you ask it. The voters are remarkably consistent in this, and the Hunt data really provides you the evidence of that. And as Governor Wise said, this is the second in the post-COVID era series that we've done. The public's, and you can see in this presentation, the press flits from topic to topic and acts like something brand new is on the horizon in this, because they want to do the shock and awe type coverage, and cable news really feeds that. The public has been remarkably consistent. The second thing I would say is that people are always more focused on schools when kids are in schools. So this is a wonderful opportunity, and the session starting, et cetera. in January and February will be a very good opportunity to do that when governors are sworn in, another great opportunity. So you are at a critical moment for this conversation. And the other thing I would say is the people think that the public flits around and from kind of sensational New York Post headline to sensational New York Post headline, and that the public can only worry about one thing at a time. Actually, the public, particularly women voters who are the core of the base here, they can worry about lots of things at once, and they are worried about lots of things. But what's different about you, and this is the last point I'll make, people are sick to death of problems. People are sick to death of things that they thought were fixed that then go bad again. As one millennial woman described it, why is everything in this country a dumpster fire anymore? You actually have the secret sauce in two ways. You have solutions. You have an agenda that can bring people together. It's presented as a very controversial agenda. It's not. It's a unifying agenda, to quote the governor. So I think that you have a tremendous opportunity here. And the problem is not the public. The problem is the press and the kind of political conventional wisdom that gets the politicians all fired up. And so you have a distracted political system and you have a public alienated from the political system because they're not distracted. They want to have individualized learning. They want to have mental health. They want to have safe schools. They want our kids trained, particularly in this uncertain economy, for job skills and critical thinking. They're not distracted. They're not flitting around. They're not subject to the most sensational social media posts that just got posted. And so I think that saying to politicians and elected officials, this is a place where you can really meet your public, and what you do will really resonate. And they are very interested whether or not they have children in school. But it's not the public that's the problem here. It's the press, it's the political establishment and the conventional wisdom that's the problem, not the public.
This is to me, I like the best acronym, Build Education Stronger Together. Education, particularly at state races, is always a top element and often couched in terms of the economy. These two go hand in hand right now. The great quip isn't about people leaving the workforce. It's about them looking to change jobs. That's about education. So there are many ways to do it, and education can actually be one of the unifying, and that's what the research data shows can be one of the unifying forces, and for that reason will stay as a top priority, and can be and should be.
And I'll say, let's use this moment to think holistically about the continuum of supports necessary for students to thrive, and we can do that together.
That is an excellent closer to this webinar. I'd like to just take a minute and thank Governor Wise, Commissioner Russell Tucker, and Celinda for joining us for today's critical discussion. Again, really appreciate you all making time out of your busy schedules to join us. Before closing today's discussion, I do want to just take a minute to turn everyone to our upcoming K-12 webinars on your screen. Our next conversation will be on Thursday, November 15th at 2 p.m. Eastern, where Superintendent Jillian Balow of Virginia, Guilford School Board Chair Dina Hayes-Green, and Director of Education and Training for Colorado's Governor's Office, Misty Ruthven, will join us for a discussion on how states can explore and utilize new NAEP data for recovery and also in a post-COVID world. And so it'll be a great discussion. So please register for that if you're interested. We also encourage you to join us for our other upcoming K-12 webinars listed on the screen. You can register for these by going to our website, which we'll post in the chat shortly. And then with that, thank you all again for joining us today, and we hope to see you all again soon.